And now, Dr. Gregory's Movie Corner.
Hello my little minions. I want to tell you about another movie I just saw called Mrs. Amworth. Mrs. Amworth is a 2007 remake of a 1975 British-Canadian short of the same name. It starts out with a young girl who has been prepared for burial. She comes back to life and attacks the funeral director, killing him before being killed herself for good. This leads a local doctor and a small town newspaper editor to start an investigation into these bizarre deaths. Then this brings us to a struggling photographer, Jed, who visits his neighbor who just moved in next door, the widow Mrs. Amworth. Mrs. Amworth slinks around her garden, looking like a statuesque Amazonian Victorian bohemian. Luke, a local boy who is helping Mrs. Amworth around her garden, is caught spying on her sunbathing. She toys with him like a cat playing with a mouse before biting his wrist. Luke becomes sick and bedridden when Mrs. Amworth comes over to take care of, or should I say finish him off, by draining him of his blood. The editor and Dr. Lamb break into the coroner's office and tear out the heart of Luke, who comes back to life when Dr. Lamb starts cutting into his chest. At Luke's funeral, Mrs. Amworth senses he is truly dead and is shocked and angered by this, confirming Dr. Lamb's suspicions of what Mrs. Amworth may be. Dr. Lamb and the editor continue their investigation of the deaths and find a link between them and Mrs. Amworth. They discover Mrs. Amworth and her husband had been around for a very long time, and wherever they lived, several gruesome deaths occurred. While traveling abroad, Mr. Amworth was brutally killed by the locals. In the meantime, Mrs. Amworth goes to work seducing pretty much everyone in town. Luke's parents even get in on the carnage fun when his father decapitates his mother and carries her head around in a wheelbarrow. We can only assume she had become a vampire. Now, I did have a problem with this scene. Wheelbarrows are not an effective way to carry around heads. I use coolers. It keeps them fresh, and if the heads are shrunken, you can store a lot in them. Mrs. Amworth starts invading Jed's girlfriend's dreams as Dr. Lamb and the editor start figuring out just what Mrs. Amworth exactly is. The movie culminates in a bloody showdown between Mrs. Amworth and several townspeople. This was a pretty sophisticated movie for a low-budget indie film, with some pretty good acting from everyone involved. Even the lighting and sound was good, and I was actually able to see all of the scenes. The only problems I had were that the beginning was pretty slow, not much as far as a story went on, and we could have seen a lot more vampire action. The only other problem I had was that the end did not tell us what happened to Dr. Lamb or the editor. They confront Mrs. Amworth in one scene, then just disappear from the last 5 minutes of the movie, except for a dream sequence, but that doesn't count. I would definitely recommend watching Mrs. Amworth. For more information on Mrs. Amworth, look it up on the web. Now go out and support independent filmmaking and watch a low-budget horror movie. Goodbye.